Welcome to the And She Looked Up Creative Hour podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfiel, and I'm an artist and an entrepreneur. And yes, those two things can go together. This podcast is for the artists, the creatives, and the makers who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa. And this week, I'm excited because we're doing something a little different on the podcast. Instead of talking about being creative, today we're going to be talking about protecting your creativity. And I am really excited to welcome attorney Andrea Henry of Henry Business Law to the podcast. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am really excited to talk. We have a lot to talk about today. So before we dive in, though, let's get to know our guest a little bit better. Andrea is a Cambridge-educated lawyer with more than a decade of experience working with businesses of all sizes and at every stage of the entrepreneurial journey. She is also an entrepreneur and a small business owner herself. When she started her firm, she had $1,000 and 3 clients. I think we can all relate to that. But within a year, she grew her practice to a 6-figure-a-year business, which is an impressive achievement for anybody. Her clients come to her because they're passionate about their businesses, but they're unsure about whether or not they're protected in the next stage of growth. And Andrea started her law firm to help ambitious entrepreneurs like all of us listening feel safe and secure in their businesses so that they can enjoy the exhilaration of growing, which is really the exciting part of starting a business.
Absolutely.
While still feeling confident that they have the right legal protections in place. And it is such a weight to have off your shoulders, knowing that there's somebody in your corner who's helping to keep you safe. It makes everything so much easier just knowing that there's somebody there who's in your corner keeping an eye out on you. So that's what we're going to be talking about. All kinds of things today. We're going to be talking about how to find a lawyer. We're going to be talking about things that you can do in your business to protect your intellectual property, which for those of us who create for a living, that's our bread and butter. The things that we create, the things that we make. And sometimes we're not very good at protecting them, not just right now, but also for the future. I think we often forget that we have a whole lifetime of creating ahead of us, and there's things that happen after our lifetime with the things that we create. So we're going to be talking about all of that today, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. But before we get into that, one of the questions I ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, did you consider yourself creative as a kid?
So I was creative with words. So my mom still has plays that I wrote when I was like 6, 7, 8. So I wrote short stories, I wrote plays, I wrote poems. I was not creative artistically, though, at all. My very best friend, who I've known since I was 11, is a great artist and just despaired at my lack of any artistic talent. But yeah, I'm good with words.
I think sometimes creativity, people confuse that with being artistic. And to me, creativity is just creating things. I love that you wrote plays. I did that too as a kid. We used to put them on in the neighborhood for our very patient parents.
I did the same thing. I love dressing up. I have a 6-year-old, my last child is a 6-year-old daughter who loves dressing up as well, and I can definitely tell where she got that gene from.
What was it that made you decide to pursue a legal career?
Oh, that's a funny story. So, I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, but my parents are from Barbados, and so I spent some of my childhood here and some there. And I spent my high school there. And so the guidance counselor, they do aptitude tests, etc. Yeah. Literally the sum total of my guidance was, you like to read and write and you like to argue. You should probably go do law. That was it. And I really love the idea of being an anthropologist. I had read like all of the Margaret Mead textbooks that my mom had brought from her university, and I just love the idea of being an anthropologist, but I had never met one. I didn't really, um, like, I didn't know what they did besides being a professor, and I was like, I don't know if I'm really cut out for that. And so law was like to read, like to, to write, like to argue, all sounded like good things. Um, and then when I went to law school, I went to law school, my first degree is from the UK, and the summer internships that we did were with huge firms and very traditional ways of doing laws. And I was like, I hate this. I do not want to have to interact with clients like this. And so when I finished, I actually took a break. I did public relations for a little bit. Um, and then I went back into it and tried to work with smaller firms. And the smaller the firm, the more comfortable I felt. And then finally, when my kids were young, I decided to take the plunge and start my own. And because I could only go to networking events when my kids were at school, I ended up going to a lot of networking groups with women, right? Other moms. And I realized that there just weren't ever any other lawyers there, which surprised me because there were people who had successful businesses, whether it was in the creative arts, marketing, coaching, and their businesses were thriving, and the vast majority of them were not having legal support. And it felt like a community that no one was paying attention to. And a lot of people were very intimidated by law, especially how it's traditionally done, right? It's the idea of someone in a business suit in a, mahogany bound
Yes.
using Latin terms and kind of being very condescending and not understanding some of the new ways in which we, create and innovate. And so I was like, okay, this is a way that I can bring my whole self where I can feel like I can be myself and be authentic and still help people who are currently being overlooked. And that's how I arrived at this point.
And as somebody who is in one of those niches, you're absolutely right. It is so hard to find a lawyer to talk to who gets what we do, those of us who are in particularly in digital content creation and things like that, and who are small single solopreneur type businesses. It's very intimidating to go. I always find this very interesting because I've worked with a lot of different communities, have a couple of businesses. So I'm in different Facebook communities. I run a Facebook community, and I'm always equally shocked, but also not shocked at how many people will go to the Facebook Hive to
Yes.
seek out answers to their legal and financial problems. And it's all because of the things you mentioned. It's partly intimidation. It's partly not sure that they're going to understand what's said to them, and a fear of how much it's going to cost them.
Of course.
So those are things we're going to kind of talk a little bit about today. But
Absolutely. Yeah, because honestly, if you can figure out how to start a business, you can figure out the legal context that your business operates in, as long as it's done in a way that makes sense to you. And we are going to talk a little bit about the legal fees are never going to be the most affordable things on the planet, but there are things that you can do to protect yourself for little to no cost.
yes, and so we'll talk about some of those today. And maybe that's a good place to start. When in your business should your first interaction with a lawyer be? Like, at what point should you maybe start thinking about, like, oh, maybe I should talk to a lawyer about this?
Yeah, I think the earlier the better. I think once you've fleshed out, you don't need to have a business plan even, but once you've fleshed out a general idea of what it is you're going to do, what your business model is going to be, how you're going to make money, who your client's going to be, and how you plan to market to them, then I think it's useful to see a lawyer for a consultation. Even if you do nothing else, have a consultation. There are a lot of lawyers who do complimentary consultations, or you may be interested in a legal audit, but you ideally want to speak to someone before you start, because what lawyers are very good at is seeing your blind spots.
Yes.
When you're starting out, you're full of excitement for what it is that you plan to do. And I don't think my job is to quell that excitement. But as you said in the introduction, sometimes the things that you're not thinking about, or sometimes it's subconscious that you're really worried because you don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Having a consultation with a lawyer who will understand your business model and be like, okay, these are the things that tend to be an issue with the type of model you have. These are the things you can probably worry less about. So, they'll give you priorities in terms of what you put in place and things that you can deal with later. But I think early, a lawyer and some type of finance, so accountant ideally, or bookkeeper, are people that you should have in your corner right at the beginning. It's a cost of doing business.
I couldn't agree more. I had an accountant before I even opened my door, but a
Right?
lawyer was something that we definitely put off. And it was, for us, it was the fear of the cost. But
Yes.
once we got through that, oh, I wish we had done it earlier. Like, it just,
Everyone says.
yes, there's just so many things that if we had, forewarned is forearmed, but also
Yes.
just we would have set things up differently. It's easier to set things up properly at the beginning than to have to go back halfway through, start
Like,
over.
anyone who's lived through a renovation, so my former husband is in construction, and so I've lived through a few of those. And absolutely, it's so much easier to start brand new than it is to retrofit. There's always going to be additional costs and additional stress in trying to put things in after. The other good thing about working with a lawyer before you start, or very early on, is that a good business lawyer is proactive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So often people come to lawyers when there is a problem. So they haven't put a contract in place and now things have gone awry, or someone's stolen their IP, or they're being sued and they're worried that they're going to lose their house. The best time to speak to a lawyer is before any of those things happen. So that one, we can be proactive in seeing where the liability, where the risks are, and trying to mitigate and reduce them. But also, a lawyer, especially a good business lawyer who's worked with lots of different businesses, will have actual business strategy insight as you start, and will be able to help you leverage your intellectual property, leverage your network in ways that you may not be thinking of.
Yes, an accountant can do the same thing. And when you
Mhm.
have both of those people on your side from the start, it can make such a difference in
Yes.
just how you plan to move forward. So here's the big question that most of us have is like, okay, how do I find a lawyer? Like,
Yes.
where do I go? How do I find somebody who is going to understand that I'm an artist, or I'm a writer, or I'm a content creator, who understands that I work from home. I don't have a big fancy office.
Office.
All these things. I'm just starting out. I don't have investors. I'm just me
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
little
Making it.
posters in my studio at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah. And I don't need the same strategy as you would give a company with 1,000 employees and,
Right.
1,500 investors. Absolutely. So I would say Facebook groups are a great place to start. Not to ask the actual questions, because that is painful to all of us when we see answers. But if you are a member of, whether it's a Facebook group or like any type of association with people with similar businesses, I'd say that's a great place to start. And you can put out a request for recommendations. And the reason to start there is those people are in similar businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they've had a good experience with a lawyer, it's likely that that person will understand your business and you're more likely to have a positive, interaction with them.
Right.
So I would start in industry associations, whether that's online or offline, asking for recommendations. If you've got friends in the industry, that's a good place to start. I would also do a search of blogs. So if there's something that you really want to know and is a really like a burning issue in your industry, do a search online and see if someone has written like a blog post or an article about it. Because if they're writing about the things that are important to you, again, really good chance that that person is going to understand your business and be able to give you kind of targeted, relevant advice. And then if those two things don't help, you can always call your law society. All of the law societies in Canada have referral services, and they will give you a free consultation with a lawyer in that particular. You can niche it down as far as you like. Um, But you can provide information about your business, what it is you're looking for, and they'll match you with a lawyer who'll give you a free consultation so you can see if it's a good match.
Oh, I didn't know that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Is it possible to work with a lawyer in a different province from where you are? So if I'm in BC and wanted to work with a lawyer in Ontario, is that possible, or do they have
Yeah.
to be licensed in different provinces? How does that work?
Great question. So the Law Society allows lawyers in each province to spend a certain number of days each year in providing services outside of their province. In Ontario, it's 100. It may differ from province to province. So the short answer is yes, you can work with a lawyer from another province. There are some circumstances in which it's really beneficial to work with someone within your province, and that's when there is specific provincial legislation addressing whatever it is that you're doing. So an
Right.
example of that is employment law. Every province has different legislation with respect to employment law. And so a lawyer in Ontario is unlikely to know the ins and outs of employment law in BC. But if you were incorporating a federal corporation, or you were doing a trademark application, which is at the federal level as well, or if you had a client contract or term, like most of the contracts that are not governed by legislation would be fine with a lawyer from any jurisdiction within Canada.
Okay, that's good to know. So if you get to the point where you've found somebody who looks like they could be a potential good fit and you're having your free consultation, what are some of the questions that you should be asking, what to make sure this is the right fit and this is somebody who gets you?
Yes. So, wonderful question. You want to make sure that this person understands your business and also is willing to work with you how you prefer to be worked with. One of the questions would be, what type of work do you usually do? Have you worked with businesses similar to mine in the past? And what percentage, of your practice is made up of these types of businesses or this type of work? I would ask, what do you love doing? Right?
Mm.
Every lawyer has one or two, maybe three things that like they would do for free if mortgages weren't so high. So so ask what do they love doing? Because ideally, the thing that they love doing in an ideal world is the thing that you want done, right? You want
Right.
someone who's really passionate about what it is that they're doing. You also want to ask about billing. As you said earlier, one of the main blocks between entrepreneurs and legal advice and support is the cost. So, lawyers traditionally, not all lawyers, and it's changing rapidly, but lawyers traditionally work on a hourly rate. So they're going to spend
Right.
X number of hours and they'll charge you at an hourly rate. I don't love it because I don't really think it's transparent because you don't know how long it takes me to do something, one. Two, it takes me less time to do something after being a lawyer for 13 years than I was, in year one. And I shouldn't get paid less because I have more experience. So for me, I prefer value billing. And that way it's fixed, it's budgeted, but you want to ask your lawyer that if and you want to think about what type of relationship do you want. Do you want this person to give you a couple of contracts and that's kind of the end of the relationship, or do you want to be able to reach out to them from time to time if you have a question? If that's the case, are they going to bill you for every 5 minutes you spend on the phone?
Right.
Right. So really think, like any other relationship, the relationship with your lawyer in your business is really important, and you want it to be as comfortable a relationship as possible. Do they offer virtual services, or do you have to come to their office every time you need to get something done?
Yeah, that's a good point, especially right now.
Yes.
But yeah, for a lot of particularly female-owned businesses, if you're a mom or something, sometimes going to your lawyer's office is not convenient.
Exactly.
And it would just be nice to have a phone call or to have a video chat.
Yeah. It was sometimes you have happy accidents in life. In 2019, I started to pivot my firm towards being virtual for selfish reasons, really. It was February, and I really am not a fan of the cold. As I said, my parents were from Barbados. I was like, if I could do this virtually, I wouldn't have to be here in the winter. But what I found was even though I started doing it for purely selfish reasons, people loved it.
Yeah.
especially moms with children. I've had calls with clients where they're bouncing their kids on their knee or they're doing their kids' hair, and it works seamlessly into their life because the reality is for a lot of entrepreneurs, like your work blends into your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more seamless it can be and the less time it takes to do something, the better, because we are always in need of more time.
Yes, absolutely. It makes you feel like your lawyer's a person too. Like this is a human that is helping me, and they understand, and it just brings some empathy and into the situation, which
Yes.
makes everyone more comfortable usually. So
Yeah.
on the area of pricing, so our
Mm-hmm.
first lawyer actually, he did project-based pricing, which I loved. Our current lawyer does hourly, which I don't love as much, but
Mm-hmm.
it was such a relief because I think that's one of the biggest things is like you have a question kind of niggling in the back of your mind and you're kind of looking at the phone and thinking like, oh, is this going to cost me $300 just to ask my question? And so you don't ask the question, and that's not a good thing. So you want to be in a situation where you're not afraid to pick up the phone and ask the question,
Exactly.
because you don't want it to wind up costing you a lot more than that down the road because you shied away from asking that question that could
Exactly.
have solved a lot of problems. So
Exactly. I started out in commercial litigation, and that was one of the things that really kind of provoked me to come to the other side because I saw people in court for disputes for hundreds of thousands of dollars that literally, had they spoken to a lawyer for maybe 20 minutes, could have completely been avoided.
yes, yeah.
And I think a lot of it is that I don't want to ask because it's going to be expensive. So if it's important to you, especially if you're in a startup or kind of the expansion phase of your business, and you know that you're going to have questions, it may be worthwhile trying to find a lawyer who will work with you almost on a retainer basis,
Mm-hmm.
where there's a set number of hours or a set type of project or numbers of calls where you'll be able to call or to get help and know that you've got one fixed price. And then it becomes almost like insurance, right? Like we pay for general liability insurance, we pay for car insurance, we pay for all different types of insurance in case the bad thing happens. And sometimes it helps to view your lawyer in the same way. Like it's a line item, just like your insurance is a line item. And it's there both to help you avoid, so to be proactive, but to be able to answer questions that come up on the fly as well.
Mm-hmm. And is it okay? Because I think a lot of people are very shy about this, but before you go in with a question, is it okay to say, I have a question about this? Like, can you give me an idea of how much it's going to have cost to have this discussion and potentially do the work? Is it okay to ask that?
It is okay to ask it. Depending on how much information you've provided, it can be difficult for a lawyer to quote. So if
Right.
you've said, like I've had people who've sent emails and said, I have a question about independent contractor agreements, but they haven't said what the question is. So it's really difficult
Right.
to know how detailed it is. Is it a dispute? Or you just wanting something to be reviewed? Um, Most lawyers will give either free or lower cost consultations to their normal hourly rate. A lot of lawyers will also credit either all or a portion of the consultation towards the work that you retain them to do after. And so ideally what you'll do is kind of bunch your questions, right? So if
Yeah.
you have a lot of things, better to deal with several at once. But I think it is okay if you have a question, then set out what the question is and say, this is what I'd like to discuss. Is this something you can answer by email and just charge me for? Do I need to book a consultation for it? Ask them. But yes, certainly don't be worried about asking. You are the client, right?
Right.
You're receiving the service, and even though lawyers sometimes think differently, we are service providers like any other service provider.
Yes. Okay, so you found somebody who you think might be a good fit, and now I think one of the things that a lot of us are just not aware of is like what kinds of things can a lawyer help me with? I think we all know that they can help me with a contract. Um,
Yeah.
but what else? Like,
So I think, especially when people are starting out, the three main kind of pillars of your legal support are going to be contracts, as you said, but also business structure. How do you own your
mhm.
business? Does it make sense for you to be a sole proprietorship? Should you be in partnership with someone else? Should you set up a corporation? And then thirdly, what is your intellectual property strategy?
Yes.
Especially in the creative industries, thinking really clearly about what it is that you create and how you're going to leverage it to grow your business and how you're going to protect it so that you can continue to leverage it is really important. And so a lawyer can do an intellectual property audit. They can help you with coming up with strategies. They can alert you to areas in which you can create or which you can. I had a coach that used to say, work hard once. So if you create something, what are the many different ways in which you can grow revenue from it? So if you create a print, you know, yes, you can sell that. You can sell the print. You may also be able to license it onto clothing or footwear, right? Um, if you do a speech for someone, if you do a presentation, you may be able to take that recording. If you've negotiated intellectual property rights, you may be able to take that recording and spin it into a course, which now you can sell. So it's looking at all the different things that you create and maximizing the value from them.
I think too, this is one I know I always neglect to think about this. It's one that I think most of us neglect thinking about, but is also the future proofing of your
Yes.
intellectual property. I mean, things like, if you wrote a book, if you wrote that book 20 years ago, we weren't really doing ebooks and Kindle versions and things like that. And so how do you
It
a lawyer
is.
can help you figure out how to future proof new
Exactly. Because
technology.
these technologies are changing so quick. So as a really quick example, I don't know if you remember a few months back, Dave Chappelle was very upset with some of the streaming platforms for streaming Chappelle's show. And he had signed a contract. And at the time that he signed the contract, streaming services didn't exist.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a specific right that he reserved himself. And so the producers were able to sell it. A lawyer will be able to help you draft a contract, for example, work this into publishing arrangements where if you're going to give up rights, you specifically give up the rights and then you reserve everything else, whether currently existing or to exist in the future, to yourself.
Yes. Especially when we're starting out, because I think when we're starting out, we're just so excited that somebody wants our stuff. We
Yes.
don't think about what's going to happen 10,
Yes.
20, 40 years down the road
Yeah.
because somebody wants our stuff. It's like,
Exactly. Like lawyers can help you with the future just in general, right? Because as you said, quite often when we start, people start for different reasons. Sometimes it's the creative passion. Sometimes it's I can't stand my boss and I just do my own thing. People start for different reasons, and often when we're starting, we're not thinking about the future. But having an exit strategy from your business is something a lawyer can help you with, and is some of the most valuable time that you can spend. Because if you think you essentially have to make the decisions for your little baby business when it's grown up,
yeah.
right? And so if you have a clear idea of where you want to end up, it's going to influence certainly the legal things that you put in place, but just generally decisions in your business because you know where it is that you're trying to go, as opposed to just kind of existing on a day to day. Oh, it's wonderful. Someone bought this.
Yeah. This is something my business partner and my other business that we're going through right now is trying to exit our current business.
Especially if you've got business partners, that makes it exponentially more difficult.
Yes, and well, that's a good point to bring up is that there are a lot of us who do decide to go into partnership with another person, and that's a whole other kettle
Oh,
of
yeah.
fish.
You could have 5 other podcasts on partnerships.
Yes.
But yeah, so a great partnership is wonderful, right? If you have someone who has, who's strong where you are weak and you guys are on the same page, a good partnership can take you much further, much faster. But over 60% of partnerships fail. So it's a higher failure rate than marriage.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't start one, but it definitely means that you need to have those awkward but necessary conversations with your business partner And you need to have a really clear partnership, or if it's in a corporation, shareholder agreement. Um, I started a firm with a business partner, and of course, we were both lawyers, so we wanted to have everything written down. But kind of more importantly, we were good friends. We'd been friends from high school. We had a lot of friends in common, and we knew that if the business relationship soured, it would impact on our social circle.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want that. And so everything was written down so that when it was clear that we weren't on the same page anymore, there was literally nothing to argue about.
Yes.
Because we had thought about it ahead of time. And so to me, a partnership agreement, really like any other contract, is a sign of respect for the relationship. This, to me, that's what a contract says. This relationship is really important to me. And so I want to be sure that one, we're on the same page, and two, that if anything happens, that we're going to be fair to each other.
That's such a good way to describe a contract. I think people tend to think when a contract comes on that you have to look for the hidden things and,
Yes.
is this person going to try and take advantage of me? And that does happen occasionally, but the
But
way
not
you
as
just,
often as people think.
yeah, the way you just described it makes so much more sense. And whether it's a partnership, and to be clear, I have a wonderful business partner, but we're just struggling with how to wrap up our business. But we did not have a partnership agreement in place at the beginning, and so we've had to kind of deal with things as they've come up, which isn't ideal. There are definitely situations where it would have been so much easier for us if it had just been outlined at the beginning. Like, if this happens, this is how we're going to deal with it. Yeah, but in terms of contracts and things like that with outside parties,
Mm-hmm.
that's a whole other situation. And probably contracts are the things that creatives deal with the most, whether it's with a client
Yes.
or with somebody who wants to license your work or is hiring you to create work for them. And one of the things I've seen a lot in the US, and it's something I don't see as much of in Canada, is that there's a lot of templates you can buy. Like, you can buy a contract template, you can buy a privacy
Mm-hmm.
policy template. And I've seen there is a firm that's started in, not really a firm, but a website that's started in Canada called goodlawyer.ca that will offer services where they'll look over a contract, or they'll help you with a terms of service or privacy policy. Are those good places to start if you don't have a lot of money to spend? How do you feel about those?
So I'm going to take a deep breath. So for a very long time, I was dead set against templates. Um, and I understood the financial considerations, but the vast majority of templates are just not customizable enough to help a lot of people. And so that was my issue with templates. But over the years, and clients saying to me, I've had clients who said, well, I bought the templates from the US site because there wasn't anything available in
Yeah.
Canada. And I just needed to have something, and I couldn't spend $10,000 on legal contracts. Um, so I would say a couple of things. One, contracts can be less expensive than you think, depending on who you're working with. But also, if you are looking for templates, try to look for templates that have been customized to your area, right? So um, we've launched last year a template site called the securestartup.ca, which is done by industry. And the idea is, so not only is it focused according to the industry and the types of issues that tend to come up with that industry, I don't know, when you look at normal templates, like you put in your name and you put in your address and the
The date.
financial details, but there isn't a lot else that you can customize. It was really important to me to be able to ask questions along the margin so that people could reflect on how their business may be different from somebody else's, and suggesting, swap clauses that you can swap in and out. So if your business is X, you should use clause B. If your business is Y, you should use clause A. So whether it's mine or whether it's someone else's, ideally you're looking for templates that have more ability to customize for your business and are targeted at the thing that you are doing. The reason is this, and I'll give an example. if you are a publisher, and this is from a real life story, say you're a publisher, right? You know those co-authored books,
Mm-hmm.
like To Conceive the Soul. So say you're a publisher and you've got an agreement with your authors. And in the agreement, there's a standard non-solicitation clause which says you're not allowed to solicit or to ask for an employee of the company, of the publisher company. You can't try to get them to come work with you. That's a standard clause.
Okay.
But what if you don't actually have employees? What if everyone that works with you are independent contractors? And what if then the other independent contractors get together and lobby the people who are with you to leave and come do something exactly like what you're doing? And you have no leg to stand on your contract because the contract was drafted for a company that has employees. And that happens a lot more often than you would think, right? Because when you're getting a template, you don't really like, you kind of trust the template side. And as I said, you put in your name, but you don't really know whether it's applicable to you. Good Lawyer, I think, is a good firm or a good service, especially if you're looking for, lower cost alternatives. My only issue, and it's not really an issue because I think as your business grows, it will be more important to have that ongoing relationship. And so Good Lawyer or Legal Shield, all of those which provide lower cost reviews, you're not going to get the same lawyer all the time. So it's a little bit of a difference between going to like a walk-in clinic and having a long-standing family doctor. Will the walk-in doctor fix whatever it is that you have that day? Absolutely, right? They're competent to do that. Will they be able to see patterns in your health and be able to see issues coming and be proactive? Probably not, because it's not the same person every time.
Right. So it's not as holistic, like
Yeah.
as if you had your own lawyer.
But if you are going to use a template, I would say at the very, very least, read through it yourself. I'm going to be talking later about a resource to try to, so that you can learn to read the contract. But read it yourself. And if there's anything that's not clear, that's the time to go to a lawyer. So ideally they review the whole contract, but say there's 2 or 3 clauses where you're like, I just don't really understand what this means, or this doesn't seem right for my business. You can ask lawyers to what we call limited retainer. Like, I just want you to read these 3 things and give me a consultation about what these mean.
Okay. That's actually really helpful. Speaking of contracts and privacy policies, this is something that comes up all the time in so many groups that I'm in and in the group that we run, where somebody pops up and says, I need a privacy policy for my website. Do any of you have one that I can borrow? And
Yes.
Or I need to put together a contract. A client is insisting on a contract. I usually do this via email. Do any of you have a contract I can borrow? Is that a good idea?
No. You'd be shocked to hear when I say no. And I understand the temptation, right? Because
Absolutely.
especially if your friend or whoever it is that you're asking has had it done by a lawyer, you're like, well, the lawyer did it, it'll be fine. When lawyers custom draft contracts, we are drafting it for the individual client. And even if you both have a creative business or a coaching business, your business model and your liabilities may be very different. And so if you take a contract from someone else who has on the surface a similar business without knowing the specifics of their business, you could be taking a contract that either has provisions that you don't need, or more concerning, doesn't have provisions that you need.
Right.
So as example, with that independent contractor agreement, right? So if you borrowed that from a friend or someone in the group, and they have employees, that contract makes perfect sense for them. You don't have any employees, so it doesn't help you.
Right. Yes. So this is, I always get such a kick out of this because this is what happens all the time, where they ask for tax advice from the group, and it's just like, no, you don't know their financial situation. Please don't do that.
I have a master's in tax law, and I still tell people you should go to your accountant, because I can give you the broad strokes of what a tax strategy should be, but I don't know your full financial picture. So I can't give you accurate advice without knowing that. But you know who knows that? Your accountant.
Yes,
Let's have it.
exactly. Exactly. So, on that note, what are some things that you absolutely should not try to MacGyver or Frankenstein together in
Hmm.
your business?
Yeah. So one of the things I think you can do, and I'm going to put lots of boundaries around this, but one of the things that I think you can do is trademark, which is surprising to a lot of people.
Really? Yeah, that's surprising to me.
If you are doing something, so how the trademark process works is our intellectual property office in Ottawa keeps lists of tens of thousands of categories that have been pre-approved. People have used already that they have pre-approved. If you are doing something similar, something simple like your name, and you've done a search, which is also available on their website, and no one else has the name, you've been using it for a while, and what you're doing matches exactly into one of the pre-approved categories, then you probably can do it yourself, right? So if, for example, it's providing poster prints or book publishing, if it's really clear that what you're doing matches one of the pre-approved categories, it's unlikely that you're going to have a problem once the name is available. Where it becomes more problematic is if there are names that are similar, or if they sound similar even if they don't look similar.
Right.
If you are trying to apply for trademark registration of a logo because the examiners have very different ideas of what is similar than the average person, right? Or if you're doing something that's novel. And when I say novel, take it with a grain of salt because our intellectual property office is somewhat in the past. They only recently allowed for coaching, and you have to be really specific. They don't have hypnotherapy. A lot of the alternative health modalities aren't there. So if what you're doing, say for example, you're doing art therapy, right?
Right.
Um, if you're doing something that's novel, then they're not going to have the pre-approved categories. And then hiring a lawyer is very useful because that person will create new categories for you using the language, using the kind of rhythm that the intellectual property office is accustomed to. A midway between that, and this is not my site, but I know the lawyer who's created this, and she's got 20 years of trademark experience. Markably.ca, that's markably.ca, will allow you to draft your own application and then have a lawyer review it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes, everybody, so you can check that out. That's interesting. I didn't know that existed. That I think would be
Yeah.
very helpful to a lot of people.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe you can trademark your own, do your own trademark,
At
but
least a little bit.
what would you
But
suggest people stay away from? Or
so I I think people should incorporate on their own, which is going to sound like blasphemy because so many people do.
you don't think they should incorporate on their own, or you do think?
I don't. I do not.
Okay.
This is why. Most people incorporate on their own and they obtain a certificate of incorporation and they toast,
Mm-hmm.
and they open a bottle of champagne, we're incorporated, and that's the end of it. The legislation, whether it's federal or each province, requires you to accomplish certain formalities after you have the certificate. And in the absence of those formalities, you can lose your limited liability protection because the courts have found if you're not going to treat the corporation as a separate legal entity and follow our rules, then neither will we.
Okay.
So, yeah. So one of the things is passing organizational resolutions of the directors and the shareholders. You actually have to issue shares. The number of people that I've worked with who've incorporated on their own and have been paying themselves dividends for years, but have zero shares. They never issued them. If you ever get audited by CRA will disallow the dividends because there are no shares on which to issue them. And if someone sues you and discovers that you haven't gone through the formalities, which they can in the discovery process, they can come against you personally, which defeats the whole purpose of
Of
being.
incorporating, yes. Okay. So I think a lot of people do try to incorporate on their own. It's interesting because I think most people I know would absolutely go to a lawyer for a trademark, but would
Yes,
consider,
but not the incorporation.
yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
that's a good one to know.
Good to know, right? Yeah, that's why I said I know it was going to seem shocking because I've heard a lot of people say, I'll do the incorporation on my own and then I'll come back to you for the contract. And I'm like, well, you know, I think if you're, and the issue is this as well. When you're incorporated and you believe you're protected, sometimes it can give you a false sense of security if you're not actually protected.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a sole proprietor and you know you're exposed, you're going to make sure that like your contracts are, rock
Right.
solid, you cross your T's and dot your I's. Whereas sometimes if you're incorporated, you might let some things slide because you're like, that's the worst that could happen,
Right.
right?
Right.
But if you're not properly incorporated, the worst that could happen is that they can come after you personally.
So that's really important information to know if you're thinking about incorporating. So that's a good one. Thank you.
Um, and then with contracts, I think again, the key relationships in your business. So I find the contract with team members is going to be really important because those people are going to have access to your client sometimes. They'll certainly have access to your intellectual property. And so that's an important contract. I do think that there are some good templates for independent contractors. So that's one where I think you can probably buy a template and have a lawyer review it for the peculiarities of your business. I think terms and conditions, you should see a lawyer because terms and conditions are really different. It's the thing that, like we do all kinds of commercial contracts. The things that are most customized are terms and conditions because everyone's website is slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're sharing and what information are you taking from from the public and who are you working with and who's getting access to their information and what intellectual property concerns they are can be really different even within the same industry. Where can you probably get templates? Employee agreements, because they're governed by legislation. A good template is going to comply with the legislation, and you shouldn't be changing that much anyway, because then you might take yourself out of legislation. I also think you can probably client agreements are on the line, but if you have someone who has a very similar business to you and you really understand that their relationships with their clients are very similar, if not the same to yours, a client agreement potentially, if it's already been done by another lawyer. But I'd say employment agreements because, they're going to follow the legislation. You're going to be bound. What other areas? Definitely not partnership agreements or shareholders agreements because, as we said, those are really, really important. You want to make sure those are done properly. Speaking agreements, you might be willing to MacGyver if all you're doing is speaking. If there's going to be recordings of your speech or you're going to, sell your books or sell your art at the event, then that's different. But if you are purely going on stage, that's something that you can probably figure out yourself.
Okay. And what about, say you are doing something very small for a client or something. I do a lot of work as a graphic designer. So let's say somebody comes to me and says, I just need like a small change to this logo or something. And it's something I'm going to charge them for an hour of my time. And we just have the agreement in email.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, because it feels a bit ridiculous to have a 15-page document for an hour of work. I fully get it. So there are two ways to do it. One, really, as long as you're setting out clearly, like if you're just doing a small change or, a relatively small piece of work, your liability isn't huge, right? And so it's probably okay to lean on the side of practicality as opposed to having this 15-page contract. As long as you have something in writing, whether it's by email back and forth and they acknowledge it, then great.
Okay.
I'm also a big fan of having terms and conditions on your website or even on a link in the email that can go to it so that when you're providing, for example, a quote to someone to do something small, you can say, acceptance of this quote, or by accepting this quote, you agree to my terms and conditions. And that way they don't have to look at the 15 pages, but it is somewhere on your website. And as long as they specifically indicate that they agree to it, then they're bound by it.
That's a really good tip. to have that in like your email or something like that. I like that. Okay, so let's say we're starting out, you're a new business, you're starting out, you don't have a lot of money to spend on legal expenses, but what are some of the things that you can do from the get-go to help protect your business and your intellectual property? Are there some things that you can put in place early on that kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say buy you some time, but just make things so that you're aware of what's going on around you, sort of.
Absolutely. So one, I think, is to learn how to read a contract, right?
Yes.
You're not going to go to law school, but learning how to look for the key components of a contract and ensuring that you understand your obligations and your restrictions and what you're giving up is a really key skill. Like that's just part of being in business is understanding how to read contracts. Until your business grows and you can hire someone to do it.
Right.
That's a really important skill. And I'll be sharing a resource called The Anatomy of a Contract, which really breaks down the key components that are in every contract and gives you a checklist of the things that you have to understand and be okay with before you sign on the dotted line. So Melissa will be sharing that later.
Yeah, we'll have that in the show notes for you.
Secondly, I would say learning to be really mindful of your intellectual property. So one of the first things that you can do if you have, so copyright, as you know, is for creative works. So if you have a piece of art or a book or a design, that's protected by copyright. You can register copyright. It's $50 on the intellectual property website. Or you can make sure that wherever your work appears, it appears with the words, all rights reserved, with your name and the year.
Okay.
You can use, if you have a name or a logo or a catchphrase, for example, anything that you would apply for trademark protection, you can assert your right. So there's a right at common law to the copyright in anything that you've created and the trademark in anything that distinguishes your business in the marketplace, such as a name or a logo. The reason why people register it is because it's unassailable proof, right? The government literally gives you a sheet of paper that says you own it. But even if you haven't taken that step, you can put the little subscript TM after your name or logo to put people on notice that you are asserting your right to trademark. It's not as good as a certificate of registration, but it does put people on notice. And if there's a dispute later, you'll be able to go back and show, no, I was using TM after this. I put everyone on notice for the past 5 years. You've only started using it in the past 2. It's mine, right?
Okay.
I also strongly suggest setting up a Google alert for your name or for your catchphrase. If people say lovely things about you, then that's what you see online. But you also see if someone else is using it. It's important to note that vigilance, right, is key. Because even if you have things registered, even if you have trademark registered, unless you're paying a lawyer to keep track, you have to see if someone's infringing on your trademark or someone's infringing on your copyright. So making sure that you are vigilant and you nip any problems in the bud. People are much more likely to respond to a cease and desist letter favorably if they've only been using it for a week than if you reach out to them after 3 years and they've built a whole brand around it, right? Yes. The other thing to kind of bear in mind, this wasn't really part of the question, but I want to say this before I forget, is that trademark and copyright, intellectual property rights in general are jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So our law in some areas hasn't really kept up with the way of the world. And the reality is, for a lot of us, our businesses are global, or at least transfer. But you can register a trademark in Canada and not be protected in the US if you haven't registered there. And so if you have if a lot of your revenue comes from outside Canada, it may be worthwhile looking to protect your mark where the majority of your revenue is coming from, where your clientele is coming from. Because if for example, if 80% of your business is from the States and you register in Canada, but someone registers the same name in America, you're going to lose the right to use it.
That's a really good point. Particularly, I know a lot of bloggers listen to this podcast, and I know that a lot of Canadian bloggers, the vast majority of their traffic actually comes from the US.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about. And if you're going through the trademark process in the US, do you have to, is it easier to involve a lawyer with that? Should it be an American lawyer? Like, how does that?
Yeah. So great question. The answer is unfortunately yes. So in June 2019, Canada joined something called the Madrid Treaty, the Madrid Protocol, which is governed the World Intellectual Property Organization. All of the member countries that signed onto this treaty said you can register the trademark in your home country and then apply to extend the registration to any member country. You'll pay additional filing fees, but you can kind of manage it from your home country. And so Canada did it. And very quickly thereafter, the US went, yes, that's fine. But if there is any correspondence, the correspondence has to go to a US attorney, which is problematic because in almost every application, you're going to have some correspondence. So that was a really long way of explaining it. But yes, if you're going to apply in the US, you need a US attorney.
Okay, that's good to know.
And that website, Markably, that I talked about earlier, they have an association with the U.S. attorney.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so that's another reason to check them out. So just briefly, we are coming up on the hour here, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but virtually everybody who creates for a living, it's certainly happened to me more than once, but at some point, somebody is going to take your stuff without your permission. What? And this is always, there's always these panicked questions like, somebody's taken my stuff. What do I do? Like, they literally just freeze up. Like, so what are some steps you can take if you've realized somebody's taken your IP? It could be, you know, they used a photograph on a menu. Suddenly your design is on a t-shirt in a store. Like, what are your first steps that you can do?
Yeah. So increasingly people have taken to public shaming, right?
Yes.
They'll just comment right on the post or on the website. I think people underestimate the power of a good cease and desist letter. So few people actually act when someone's infringing their intellectual property rights. But in the vast majority of cases that I've been involved in, whether it's a client sending the letter or, you know, it has a little bit more weight if a lawyer sends a letter, but just, and it doesn't have to be really threatening, right? I tend to write letters that go, hey, you probably didn't realize that this isn't, that this is mine, but, you know, it's come to my attention that you're using this. We've used this mark in association with X for this length of time. And we've, you know, this is our creation. This is our blog content. This is our marketing content. This is a print that we've created. You know, you may not have been aware, but this is ours. And so we're going to give you 3 days or 5 days or whatever to remove it from your sites. Please confirm when it's done. We trust that this is going to be the end of this, but, you know, be aware that we are going to ensure that we enforce our rights. And that's it. And 9 times out of 10, especially if you've nipped it early, the person will comply because they know that if it's yours and you are going to pursue it, it's going to be a pain for them and they're going to lose. So for most people, they'll comply. Not everyone, but for most people. So I would say even before you go to a lawyer, if funds are a concern, just send them an email, right? Using that general script. A lot of the times that will be enough. If the person doesn't comply or they ignore you, then it's time to escalate it to have a lawyer send a letter. Again, there are a couple of things that you have to bear in mind before you spend the money on a lawyer. One, where's the person located? So if you are in Canada and the person who is infringing is in the US, having a letter from a Canadian lawyer, probably not that threatening, right? We can't reach them easily. Two, you want to look to see, sometimes people, so this is not so much an issue with like a print or, a sculpture, because it's going to be really clear that's theirs. But when it comes to names and catchphrases, for example, often people will say, well, this is my name and no one else can use it. which is not how trademarks work. It's your name in the thing that you're doing. So as an example, Dove is a bar of soap. It's also a chocolate bar. And here in Toronto, it's a dry cleaners. Because no reasonable person would mistake a bar of soap for a chocolate bar.
I hope not.
Very hungry when I was doing keto, I might have. But it's whether it's going to cause confusion.
Right.
And so often people are like, someone stole my name and they're using it, unless they're doing something that you're doing, right? If they're in the same area and there's a risk of confusion, then even if you had a registered trademark, there's not much you're going to be able to do about it. As much as it's not fun, they're not causing confusion because no one would confuse the two services or the two goods.
Okay, I'm just thinking back to when the Olympics were in Vancouver, and there was a pizza place that had been in business for decades called Olympic Pizza, and the Olympics went after them and wanted them to remove the name, and everybody was like, "It's a pizza place. Like, we know it's not the Olympics." So
it doesn't stop people from starting suits.
No.
But, yeah, exactly that. Like, no one's going to confuse the pizza place with, the athletes' village. So
yeah. Okay, well, before we wrap up, the last question I want to ask is one that I don't think people think about, but I think there's a lot there to think about, and that is, how can a lawyer help me grow my business? You've passed the startup phase, you're ticking along, and you're feeling good about how things are going, and you're seeing growth. And what can a lawyer do to help you keep growing?
So this is my favorite question of all times. I have a client who recently, we were having a strategy session, and she's like, I didn't know lawyers could do all of this. Why don't you tell more people? So in the spirit of that, lawyers can, especially when they've been working with you for a while and they understand what your business goals are, they can proactively help you come up with strategy to grow. And that may be through leveraging assets. That may be through corporate and tax structure so that you're retaining more of what you make. As your income goes up, CRAs,
they want more too. Yeah.
Contribution goes up as well. And so it becomes more important to have effective tax planning. When we all start out, even if you incorporate to have limited liability, because most of us, when we start, have more assets in our personal name than our business name. But after you've been in business for a while, the opposite can be true. You may have lots of retained earnings in your corporation, which means that if someone sues the corporation, all of that lovely cash is now available to satisfy a claim. So a lawyer will see when that's happening and may speak to you about having a holding company or putting a trust in place if it's important to protect against creditors for you or for your children. If you think that there may be a marriage breakdown, there are ways in which lawyers can help you kind of creditor-proof your assets. It may be, again, having a more robust intellectual property strategy, right? Discussing licensing and ways in which you can increase the leverage that you get from every piece of creative material that you put out. They can also help you in terms of building a team, right? One, in making sure that you have good contracts, which will allow you to share some of your secret sauce without being worried that people are going to steal and go compete against you. But they can also help you determine when it's time to move over from an independent contractor to an employee, which is the key part of a lot of companies as they scale. Because as you get busier and as you grow, you need to have people who are full-time focused on your business. And a lawyer will help you identify when that happens and how best to do it. Those are just some of the areas, but
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of us don't think about, especially when we're starting out. It's just, you're very in the moment when you're starting out. You're just trying to make a few dollars at that point. But as you move along, there's all these things that start to come up, and you don't know what you don't know, but that's where a lawyer and an accountant can be so helpful, because they do know and they can spot these things as they're coming up, not when they're actually happening, but
when they're upon you. That's it. I said to a client the other day who was Incorporated, and we were talking about exit planning. And I was like, yeah, so when you sell the shares, you get a per shareholder capital gains exemption of 864,000. And like her mouth hung, just didn't know that. But yeah, so again, when you're deciding, when you're thinking about exit planning and how are you going to leave the business, is this something that you're building up to sell? Or are you planning to pass it on to the next generation? A lawyer can help you to do that in a way that minimizes taxes or defers taxes by something called an estate freeze. So really, the more you make, the more it's at risk, right?
Yeah.
The bigger you grow, the less you're touching every aspect of your business, the more risk they are. And so it really becomes useful to work with a lawyer to identify all the areas of risk and the areas of opportunity and help you take advantage of the opportunity without putting yourself in unnecessary risk.
Yes, this is really interesting. We're at the stage in the blog, when blogging first started back in the very early 2000s.
Yes.
It was the Wild West, right? It's just people were out there doing all kinds of things. You weren't really making any money. But we're at this point now where that digital content creation world has really matured, and some people are making a tremendous amount of money. And I saw in a group that I'm in a few weeks ago, people were talking about putting their houses in trusts, and I had never heard of that. I was like, what is it? Why would you do that? And so it's all very eye-opening, but again, I would never have known that. I'm certainly not at that point. I don't own a house, so I don't have to worry. But these are the things that a lawyer can help you identify and protect.
Absolutely.
All this stuff. You've made all this money. You've worked so hard to get to where you are. It's really important to protect all of that so that you get to enjoy it.
That's right. Right? And ideally that again, when we talk about exit plan, lawyers can help you with systems as well. That's not their strategy, but in terms of like, what do you need to have in place? My whole goal in life, Melissa, is to be on a beach with something strong and fruity while money continues to hit my account. That's my goal. That's how I'll when I'm successful, right? That requires certain systems, and you need the legal underpinnings of those systems for them to work and not, fall apart. And a lawyer can help you with that as well. So it's really an opportunity. A good relationship with your lawyer is when you come up with the dreams, right? You come up with what you want your life and your business to look like. And your lawyer goes, that sounds amazing. Let's talk about how we're going to get that done.
I was just saying to a guest yesterday that I just want to make a lot of money so that I can buy other people's art. I just want to fill my walls with art that I love, and I want to be able to support other artists. Like, that would make me so happy in life. And everybody's goal is different, but having somebody in your corner who can help you reach that goal and make sure that you stay safe while you're doing it is a really important thing, not just for your business, but also for your mental health and well-being. You don't want to be lying there at night at 4:00 in the morning thinking about, these worst case scenarios and things and not knowing if you're protected.
And I think sometimes for entrepreneurs, especially in the creative space, like, we don't want to think about anything negative.
We don't. We just want to make stuff.
Just want to make stuff. Just want to be, perfecting your craft, and you don't want to think about all this stuff. But as with a lot of things that we worry subconsciously, and as you said, that weight that lifts from your shoulders when it's, when you've dealt with it, it's like, I remember the first paycheck that I had, I bought life insurance because it was so important to me to have that taken care of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So like, sometimes you're not thinking about it, or it's not I have a client who said, paying you is like fixing my roof when it has a hole in it, when I really would prefer to buy some new shoes. Right? It's not always the most fun, but you're going to feel so well and, and protected when your roof no longer lets in water.
Yes. It's like that big exhale when something, just goes the way you want it to go, and you just exhale and everything feels loose and good, and it's it may not be glamorous. There's a lot of things about running a small business that are really not glamorous at all, but it feels very good when you know that you've been in it. I always kind of joke, it's like I was a grown up today and it felt good.
Exactly. So like getting your accounting and your legal house in order is a very grown-up thing to do. And though it doesn't feel fun, like when you see the freedom that you have and the impact that you can have from putting those things in place, it begins to be fun.
Yeah, I saw something on Facebook or Twitter or something very recently where somebody was talking about self-care and saying it's really important to recognize that self-care is more than going to the spa or getting your nails done. Self-care is making sure that you have life insurance. It's making sure that you have gone to the doctor this year. It's all these things that are not really very fun, but they're important to your overall well-being and the well-being of your business.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. This was so helpful. I think people are going to find this really useful. I found it really useful. And you gave us a wealth of information. We're going to include links to some of the resources we talked about in the show notes. And as Andrea mentioned, she also has a download on her site, thesecurestartup.ca, where you can download her free guide to the anatomy of a contract. And this is a great resource if you are somebody who deals with a lot of contracts, whether you are putting your own contract out there or receiving contracts from a third party. It helps you understand what to look for, as she mentioned, and we will put a link to that in the show notes as well, so you can go grab your copy of that. And where else can we find you online besides the Secure Startup?
Yeah, I tend to hang out on Instagram at Henry Business Law. HenryBusinessLaw.com is the website. And less frequently, we are on LinkedIn. I prefer Instagram. I'm kind of visual too.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. I really enjoyed our chat this week. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with us. And I do encourage you all to go visit Andrea's website and check her out. She is a very easy, comfortable person to talk to. You can forget that she's a lawyer. She's just nice to talk to.
Take that as a compliment.
I meant it as one.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and we will be back with another new episode next week. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.